She was just serving drinks at the gala, until the Mafia boss said, "Bring that girl to me." The tray was heavier than it looked, and my arms had stopped complaining an hour ago. I moved along the edge of the ballroom the way I always move through rooms like this one, close to the walls, eyes down, careful not to touch anyone who mattered. And in a place like the Ardent, on a night like this, everyone mattered except me. The chandeliers hung low and gold over a sea of black tuxedos and dresses that cost more than a year of my rent. Champagne, whiskey, something amber the older men drank in silence. A live quartet played somewhere behind the crowd, and under the music was that low sound rich people make when they laugh without opening their mouths. I refilled glasses, collected empty ones. I did not exist, and that was exactly how I liked it. My name is Talia Moreno, and not so long ago I would have told you the worst thing that could happen to a girl like me was being noticed. I was 23, working 2 jobs, catering parties I'd never be invited to. I'd learned young that being invisible was a kind of safety. Nobody hurts what they don't see. So I kept my chin tucked and my shoulders small, and pretended the whispering had nothing to do with the men near the center of the room, the ones the whole party leaned away from even while pretending not to. I knew who they were. Everyone in the city did. The way you know not to walk down a certain street after dark. The Vitale family. Old money that wasn't clean. The kind of name people said quietly, if they said it at all. And at the center of them stood him. I hadn't meant to look. I'd spent my whole life not looking. But the crowd shifted and the space between us opened up. And I saw him, and my feet just stopped. He was tall, dressed in black so dark it swallowed the light, holding a glass he wasn't drinking from. Men twice his age spoke to him and waited, actually waited, for him to answer. And when he didn't, they filled the silence themselves, nervous, eager. He had a stillness the whole room bent around, and he was looking at me, not near me, at me. I dropped my eyes so fast the ballroom tilted. My heart slammed against my ribs. I told myself I'd imagined it, that a man like that didn't see a girl like me, that I was one more black and white uniform carrying his liquor. I turned toward the service door with my tray, ready to vanish back into the kitchen and stay there. I didn't make it. A hand closed around my elbow. Firm, not cruel, but the kind of grip that told you struggling would be a mistake. I looked up into the face of a broad man with a scar through his eyebrow, and behind him a second one, younger, watching the room instead of me. "Mr. Vitale wants to see you," the scarred one said. His voice was polite. That was the worst part. "This way." The tray shook in my hands. Someone took it from me. "I'm sorry," I heard myself say, thin. "Whatever I did, I didn't mean, if a glass was wrong, You didn't do anything," the younger one said, almost gentle. "Just come." And so, in front of 200 of the richest, cruelest people in the city, I was walked across the ballroom like a thief. I felt every eye follow me, heard the whispers change shape. The women in their diamonds looked at me the way you look at a mistake, and I wanted the floor to open and take me. Then I was standing in front of him, and the whispering died completely. Up close, he was worse. Or better. I couldn't tell. He had dark eyes that didn't move when they landed on you, and a scar of his own, thin and old, along one knuckle. He studied me like he was deciding what I was worth and what I might cost him. "Leave us," he said, and the men around him melted away without a word. I stood there in my cheap flats and my borrowed vest, shaking, and I did the only thing I knew how to do when I was afraid. I lifted my chin and I looked right back at him. "If you're going to fire me," I said, "you don't need 6 men to do it." Something flickered in his face. Surprise, maybe. It was gone before I could name it. "You looked at me," he said. His voice was low and even, a voice used to being obeyed. "No one in this room has looked at me in the eye all night. Not one. They're afraid to. But you did. I didn't mean to." "I know." He tilted his head. "That's why it mattered. I didn't understand him, and I told him so, and he almost smiled. Almost. What's your name?" "Talia. Emiliano Vitale," he said, though we both knew I already knew it. "You're not afraid of me, Talia?" "I'm terrified of you," I said. It just fell out. But being terrified and looking down have never actually saved anybody. So, he was quiet for a long moment. The party swirled around us, everyone pretending not to watch and watching anyway. "Go home," he finally said. "Someone will take you. I can take the train." "No," he said. And it wasn't cruel, But it was final, the way a closing door is final. You can't. Not anymore. I should have run, but there was a black car waiting at the curb, and a driver who already knew my address, and I understood, standing there in the cold, that whatever this was had already decided to happen to me whether I agreed or not. He didn't call the next day, or the one after. I went back to work, and told myself the whole thing had been a strange dream, that a man like Emiliano Vitale forgot girls like me before the valet brought his car. Then on the third day, there was a car outside my building again, and a note on cream paper that said only, "Dinner, tonight." It wasn't a question. I want to tell you I refused. I didn't. Some reckless, stupid part of me I hadn't known I had wanted to be seen again by the one man in that room no one else could look at. They drove me to a penthouse 40 floors above the city, all glass and shadow. The lights of Manhattan spread below like something he owned. He was waiting at a table set for 2, no servants in sight, sleeves rolled up, and for a second, he looked almost like a normal man. Then I remembered the way the ballroom had bent around him, and stopped fooling myself. "You came," he said. "You didn't really give me a choice. There's always a choice." He pulled out my chair himself. "You just don't always like the other one." We ate. He asked me real questions, about my mother who'd raised me alone and died 2 winters ago, about why a girl who clearly wasn't stupid folded napkins for people who wouldn't remember her face. I asked him nothing, because I was afraid of the answers, and he noticed that too. "You can ask," he said. "I won't lie to you. That's a promise I don't make often. So use it." So I asked the only thing that mattered. "What do you want from me?" He set down his glass. Outside, the city glittered. "I don't know yet. That's new for me. I always know what I want. That's the whole job." For once his eyes weren't measuring. They were just tired. "You looked at me like I was a person and not a threat. Do you have any idea how long it's been since anyone did that?" I did, actually. I knew exactly how it felt to move through the world unseen. We were opposite ends of the same loneliness. Him too dangerous to be looked at, me too small to be worth it. "This is a bad idea," I whispered. "The worst," he agreed. And he smiled, a real one this time, and it undid something in my chest that I'd spent years locking shut. He didn't touch me that night, or the next time, or the one after. He simply pulled me into his world 1 careful inch at a time, and I let him, and I hated how much I let him. I met the family. The Vitale mansion sat behind stone walls in the old part of the city, where men in good suits carried guns under their jackets, and no one pretended otherwise. There was Lucio, the consigliere, an older man with kind eyes and a mind like a trap. There were captains and cousins and a grandmother who ran the kitchen like a general and decided, for reasons I never learned, that she liked me. And there was Ottavia. She was everything I wasn't. Tall, polished, born into this world, with a name that had been promised to Emiliano's since before either of them could walk. The Bruno and Vitale families had an arrangement, old and binding, sealed in a time when marriages were treaties. Ottavia had spent her whole life expecting to be his wife, and she looked at me across a silver-set table as if she were doing arithmetic, and I was a number that didn't belong. "So this is the little waitress," she said, smiling with her mouth only. "How charming! Emiliano, you always did like to collect strays." "Careful," he said, without looking up from his plate. Just the one word. The temperature of the whole table dropped. I could have sat there and taken it. Old me would have. Instead, I set down my fork. "I did serve drinks," I said pleasantly. "For 8 years. You learn a lot watching people drink. You learn who's kind to the help when no one important is looking." I smiled at her the same way she'd smiled at me. You'd be surprised how many diamonds turn out to be paste. There was a silence. Then Lucio let out a short bark of laughter and covered it with a cough. Emiliano's mouth twitched, and Ottavia's face went white and then red. She didn't speak to me again that night. It wasn't a victory, but it wasn't a surrender either. And in that house, that mattered. Later, on the terrace, Emiliano found me looking out at the dark garden. "You made an enemy tonight," he said. "She was already my enemy. I just stopped pretending I couldn't see it." He stepped close, closer than he needed to, and I felt the warmth of him at my back before he even touched me. He didn't. He just stood there, his voice low near my ear. "The contract with the Brunos is real," he said. "The oldest agreement my family has. Breaking it means war." My chest went tight. Then why am I standing here? That is the question keeping me awake. His hand came up and brushed a loose strand of hair from my neck, one knuckle grazing my skin, and my breath caught and stayed caught. He was close enough that I could have leaned back into him. I wanted to. I didn't. You should be careful with me, I said, and I hardly recognized my own voice. I've never once been careful, he murmured. Maybe it's time I learned. Then he stepped back, and the cold air rushed into the space where he'd been, and I understood I was in far, far more danger than any waitress had a right to be. Not from his men, from him, from the way I was already falling. Weeks passed. I stopped catering parties. He hated my going into rooms full of dangerous men as invisible staff, though he never said so outright. He said, "You don't need to do that anymore." And I said, "I'm not going to be kept." And somehow we both won, and both lost that argument every time. We fell into each other slowly, in conversations that ran past midnight, in the way he started telling me things he'd never told anyone. About his father, a cruel man who'd built the family on fear and left Emiliano a throne made of knives at 19. About the promise he'd made his dying mother, to protect what was his, whatever it cost him. He wore his coldness like armor, because the world had taught him that warmth got people killed. And here I was, a crack in that armor, and it terrified him more than any rival ever had. I loved him before I let myself say the word. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday, watching him argue with his grandmother about a soup, laughing, unguarded, his whole face open for 1 second. Knowing it scared me more than his whole empire, because I understood exactly how a girl like me ends up in a story like his, broken and forgotten, a stray he'd collected and set down again. But he didn't set me down. He held on tighter. And that should have been my first warning, because a man like Emiliano Vitale doesn't hold on to anything without a reason he isn't telling you. The reason came out on a rainy night in October, and it broke everything. I found the file by accident. I'd gone into his study to bring him coffee, and he was gone, called away, and a folder sat open on the desk. And I saw my own mother's name, Moreno, Elena, and beside it the date she died. My hands went cold. I shouldn't have read it. I read all of it. My mother hadn't died the way I'd been told. Not a car that lost control on a wet road. There had been a debt, an old one from before I was born, money she'd borrowed from the wrong people when my father left us with nothing. The wrong people were the Vitale family, and when she couldn't pay, when she'd run out of time, someone had been sent to make an example of her. The order had come from this house, from his father, but the man who'd carried it out, who'd tracked her down that winter, whose name was signed at the bottom of the page in a hand I recognized because I'd watched it write me notes on cream paper. I couldn't breathe. The room tilted. The coffee cup slipped from my hand and shattered on the floor, and I didn't even hear it break. He'd known, all this time. He'd walked me through his house and pulled out my chair and touched my neck on the terrace, and he had known that his own hand had taken my mother from me. Talia. He was in the doorway. He saw the file. He saw my face. Whatever was in his own face, I couldn't look at it. "You knew," I said. My voice didn't sound like mine. It sounded like it was coming from underwater. "The whole time. That's why you saw me at the gala. You knew who I was." "Yes." He didn't lie. He'd promised he wouldn't, and even now he kept it. And I hated him for that, too. "I've known your name for years. Talia. I was 19. My father put a gun in my hand and told me it was a test. And if I failed it, he'd know I was weak, and weak men in my family don't." He stopped. His jaw worked. "There is nothing I can say that makes it anything but what it is. I took your mother from you. I've carried it every day since." "Don't." I was shaking so hard I had to hold the desk. My stomach turned over and I thought I might be sick. "Don't you dare make this about your guilt. She was all I had, and you let me fall in love with you knowing that you—" The word love hung in the air, awful, out of place, and it was the truest and worst thing I'd ever said. "I found you again a year ago," he said low. "I was going to make it right quietly, from a distance. Money, protection, penance. And then you looked at me across that room like I was a man and not a monster, and His voice cracked, and I'd never heard it crack, not once. "I've always taken what I wanted. I wanted one more night of you looking at me like that, and then another. I know what I am. I never once deserved it." "No," I said. "You didn't." I walked past him. He didn't try to stop me, and that somehow was worse than if he had. I got in a car and I gave the driver my old address, and I went back to the small, safe, invisible life I'd left, and I cried until there was nothing left. And the whole time one thought went round and round in my head. I had let the man who killed my mother put his hands on me, and I had called it love. I stayed away for 2 weeks. I went back to catering, back to the walls, back to being no one. But invisible didn't feel safe anymore. It felt like hiding, and I was so tired of hiding. My mother had spent her whole life afraid, small, running from men like the Vitales, and it hadn't saved her. I had a choice she never got. I could stay small forever, or I could walk, with my eyes fully open, toward the most dangerous, most broken, most honest thing that had ever happened to me. Lucio came to me first, the consigliere. He found me at the end of a shift, standing in the cold, and he didn't touch me, just talked. He hasn't left the house in 12 days, he said. He isn't eating. He's making mistakes, the kind that get people killed in our line of work. He studied me with those trap mind eyes. I've served that family for 40 years. I watched a 19-year-old boy do a terrible thing because a monster told him he had to, and I watched it hollow him out. I'm not asking you to forgive him. I'm asking you to know that the man you met at that gala is not the boy who hurt your mother. He spent his whole life becoming someone who could undo it, and never found a way. He paused. There's something else. The Brunos are moving. Ottavia's family. They've wanted Vitale territory for a generation, and now that Emiliano's distracted grieving you, they've decided this is the moment. And I think they mean to use you to spill the blood. Me. You're the crack in his armor, Lucio said simply. Everyone knows it now. And in our world, you don't attack a man's walls. You attack the thing he'd tear the walls down to protect. 2 nights later, they took me. I never even saw the car. One moment I was walking home. The next there was a bag over my head and the cold shock of realizing my quiet, invisible life had never been safe at all. When they pulled the bag off, I was in a warehouse that smelled of salt and rust, and Ottavia Bruno stood in front of me in a white coat, looking at me the way she had across that first dinner table, like arithmetic. "The little waitress," she said. "He had to lose his head over a girl who pours drinks." She crouched to my level. Behind her, 6 men with guns. "Here's how this goes. My father calls Emiliano. He comes for you, because of course he does. He's not himself anymore. And when he walks in that door alone to save his little pet, we end the Vitale line, and this whole city becomes ours. You're not a person to me, sweetheart. You're bait. I should have been afraid. I was afraid. But under the fear, something else had gone very still and very clear, the way things get clear when you finally stop having anything left to lose. Maybe, I said, working my wrists slowly against the ropes. Whoever tied them had been in a hurry. But you made one mistake. You spent your whole life being handed things. The name, the money, him. You never had to learn anything the hard way. I got one hand loose and kept it behind my back. I spent 8 years watching people like you from behind a tray, and I know that phone you're about to call him with is the only thing keeping this plan alive. She frowned, just slightly, and in the half-second her weight shifted, I moved. I wasn't a fighter, and I didn't overpower anyone, but I'd spent my life being invisible, and invisible people learn where the exits are and how to not be where the danger is looking. I knocked the phone from her hand and ran, not for the door where the 2 men stood, but for the dark at the back of the warehouse, low and fast, the way I'd slipped out of 100 rooms full of people who never saw me leave. Shouts behind me. A shot. Deafening. Punching through metal near my head. I didn't stop. I found a gap where the old siding had rusted through and forced myself out into the freezing night and the noise of the water, and ran along the docks with my heart in my throat. And that's where they were. The whole street was full of black cars. Emiliano's men, dozens of them, moving in silence toward the warehouse. He hadn't come alone. He'd come with everything he had. He saw me stumbling toward him across the wet pavement, and the man who never lost his composure broke into a run. He caught me before I fell. His arms went around me so hard it hurt, and I let them. And he said my name over and over into my hair like it was the only word he knew. "You came with an army," I gasped. "You didn't walk in alone. You think I'd give her what she wanted?" His hands shook as they moved over my face, my arms, checking me for damage. "I've made every mistake a man can make, Talia. I wasn't going to make the one that got you killed. Are you hurt?" "No. I got myself out. He looked at me then, like I'd rewritten what he thought I was. Of course you did, he breathed. It ended fast after that, the way these things do when one side walks into a trap they thought they'd set. I won't pretend I understood all of it, or wanted to. Emiliano put me in a car with Lucio and went into that warehouse himself, and what happened inside was between him and the Brunos, and the world I'd spent my life not looking at. When it was over, the Bruno family was finished. Not just Ottavia, though I learned later what became of her, and I won't pretend it kept me up at night. The whole arrangement, the ancient contract that had promised him to another woman since before he could walk, was ash. There was no one left to enforce it. In one night, the thing that had stood between us was gone, burned down by the very people who'd built it. He didn't come to me right away. He gave me weeks, and sent nothing but a single message through Lucio. When you're ready, not before, never again before you choose it. And that, more than anything, was what brought me back. I'd had a choice taken from me once, when they took my mother. For the first time, someone was handing the choice to me, whether to stay safe and invisible and alone, or to walk, with my eyes fully open, toward the most dangerous, most broken, most honest thing that had ever happened to me. I thought about my mother a lot in those weeks, and about what forgiveness was, whether it was a thing you gave or a thing you decided. I don't think I ever truly forgave the boy with the gun. You can't forgive something like that. It's too big to fit inside a single word. But I came to understand the man he'd spent every year since becoming. A man who could have paid me off and disappeared, and instead told me the truth when a lie would have been easier. A man who'd come for me with an army because he refused to let his love be the thing that got me killed, the way his father's cruelty had killed her. I went to him on a clear, cold evening in December. I took the train, and then I walked the last blocks myself, and no one drove me because I didn't let them. He opened the door and just looked at me, thinner than before, careful, like I might vanish. I'm not here because I forgive you, I said. My voice was steady. I'd practiced. I don't know if I ever fully will. My mother is still gone, and you're still the reason, and that's never going to stop being true. I know, he said quietly. I'd never ask you to pretend otherwise. But I've spent my whole life being afraid, being small, not looking up, and it never once kept me safe. She was afraid her whole life, and it didn't save her. I stepped over the threshold, into his world, on my own 2 feet this time. I'm done being invisible, Emiliano. I want to be seen, and you're the only person who ever actually saw me. Something broke open in his face, and this time he didn't hide it. He reached for me like a man reaching for the one thing he'd never believed he'd get to keep. That night I let him have all of me, and I let myself have all of him. And for the first time, it wasn't a mistake I was making with my eyes shut. He undressed me slowly, like I was something he was afraid to break, and I stopped his hands and made him look at me first. All of me. The body I'd spent years hiding under a black vest and a bowed head. He looked like he was being given something holy. Don't hide from me, he murmured against my skin. Not you. Never you. And the strange thing was that as much as I was giving myself to him, it was me holding the whole night in my hands. Every breath he took was one I decided. The most dangerous man in the city, and it was my name he said like a prayer. My touch that made his careful control fall apart. His mouth traced the line of my throat, my collarbone, lower, slow and reverent, and my thoughts went quiet, and then went wild, and I stopped thinking about what I should be and just felt what I was. Wanted. Chosen. Warm for the first time in years. The heat of him. The weight. The way his breath shook when I pulled him closer. All of it built until there was no space left between us. No armor. No history. Nothing but the two of us breathing the same air. You're the only thing, he said against my mouth, his voice wrecked. The only thing I've ever had that I didn't want to destroy. Do you understand me? Everything I touch, I ruin. Not you. Never you. It was always going to be you. And when it was over, when I lay against his chest, listening to his heart finally slow, I understood that something had changed for good. He had spent his whole life taking. Tonight he had given, and let himself be held. And I think it healed something in both of us we'd each carried alone too long. I love you, I said into the dark. The word I'd been afraid of. It didn't feel like falling anymore. It felt like landing. His arms tightened around me. Say it again, he whispered. So I know it's real. I did. We were married the following spring, in the garden behind the mansion, under the trees where he'd once brushed a strand of hair from my neck, and I'd known I was in trouble. His grandmother cried and pretended she wasn't. Lucio walked me down the aisle, because somewhere along the way the old consigliere had decided I was his to protect too. I never became invisible again. That was the thing about standing beside Emiliano Vitale. The whole world looked at you whether you wanted it to or not. But I found I didn't want the walls anymore. Being seen wasn't the danger I'd spent my life believing it was. The danger had always been staying small enough to be stepped over. I was not a stray he'd collected. I was his wife, and I had a voice. And when I spoke at that long silver table, men who'd killed for a living leaned in to listen, because they'd learned what Ottavia never had, that the girl who'd poured their drink saw everything and could not be moved. There's a photograph on his desk now, where the file used to be. It's the two of us, and I'm laughing, unguarded, my whole face open. He says it's his favorite thing he owns, and he's owned a great deal. Last night I couldn't sleep, and I stood at the tall windows the way I had that first dinner, looking out at the city, all those lights, all that danger spread below. He came and stood behind me, and this time I leaned back into him, and his arms came around me, and neither of us said anything for a long while. My mother spent her whole life afraid of the dark out there, and I used to think the only safe thing to do was hide from it. But standing in the circle of his arms, 40 floors above a city that had never once been kind to a girl like me, I finally understood that safety was never about being unseen. It was about being held by someone who would burn the whole world down before he let it touch you, and choosing, every single day, to be held. The city was still dangerous out there, and it always would be. But in here, for the first time in my whole life, I didn't need to protect myself from anything. I was seen, I was chosen, I was home, and I wasn't going anywhere.